Okay, now I just wanted to try and talk to you about how we can present graphically some of this information that we've got from the data set. And the first thing that I'd like to do is to try and tell you about how to compare the three data sets that we have. Okay, so basically the first numeracy area, which is data, measurement, space and geometry. Second numeracy area, which is number, patterns and algebra, and the third numeracy area is everything encompassing those two. Okay, so basically if we're trying to compare them, we can't go and look at just the mean number of correct answers, because there's different numbers of questions in each section. So there's 19 in the first numeracy area, there's 16 in the second, and there's 35 in total in the entire numeracy. So basically what we need to do is use a percentage. Okay, so I've just put percentage and numeracy here. That's just a label. That is something that we'll need for when we transfer it to make our graph. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to press equals. So I'm going to generate a percentage now. So if we click the mean and we divide it by the number of questions, which is 35, and we times it, so we multiply that by 100 to get a percentage. Press enter. Okay, so we have, if it's correct to two decimal places, 45 and 43 hundredths. Okay, 45.43%. So basically where we go from here is that I've already done that for the others. So we make a new sheet. This is where we're going to graph. So if we're going to graph, okay, it's a bit slow. If we're going to graph, what I will do is I will copy the label of the numeracy area and the percentage. Okay, that's all we need. We have to paste special values because they have a formula in it. Okay, so we have to do that 3 times for each, or once for each. So copy, go to the sheet, paste special again, and click values. Numeracy is the same. Copy, go to the sheet, paste special, and values. Okay, now I just want to say we're going to use a column graph. Why we're going to use a column graph is that these three things are categorical. They are categories. Okay, when you have categories that would run along the horizontal axis, that is when that you would use a column graph. Okay, so basically categories are the things that we're measuring about. Okay, so if it was numbers, we would use a histogram, and we will use a histogram later, and I'll explain how and why in another video. Okay, so first thing is that we have to go to insert. Now we've selected the data, insert column, just go with that first one there. Okay, now the first thing that you will notice is that these numbers look very, very similar. Look at this graph, they look great, vastly different. Okay, now what that's all about is if you look here, you will notice that the axis labels run from 44.6 up to 46. Okay, now that's something that is sometimes exploited, and when in persuasive texts. Okay, so advertising often will use that, or you'll see a lot in publications where they're trying to support a point with some evidence. A lot of the time that evidence isn't telling really the full picture. Okay, so I'm going to right click that. If I do format axis, I can change that to 0. So if I click fix there, put it to 0, this will give us a much more complete picture. To close. Okay, and you'll see now they look very similar. Okay, so the next thing is I will enlarge this. I'll make this graph a lot larger because we're going to add titles. And titles, a title for your graph and for both axes is important, and that's something that you really have to instill in your students. Okay, so basically I will select the graph and go to layout, and we'll add a chart title. Okay, so above the chart's probably best. Has to be something that's relatively concise but conveys what the chart is about. So I think we will just have percentage of correct answers across numeracy areas Okay, now what we have is it's still slightly big, so we might just enlarge it ever so slightly and see if we can get it onto one line. Okay. Now the next step would be, I noticed I removed a legend earlier. We still need to label the axes. Okay, so we'll do the horizontal axis first, and we'll put the title below the axis. Okay, that would just be numeracy area. Now you see how small this is. I think we should run with a bigger font. So if I click the edge of that box and go back to the Home tab, we can change that size. We can use any font we like, but that seems to be suitable. Okay, and the graph is still selected, so we can go back to the Layout tab and do the primary vertical axis. I would suggest that we run a horizontal title. You could run the other, but I think that will do. And it will be really percentage correct answers. Maybe percentage of correct answers. Okay, once again, it's just about the font size. We'll go back to Home. Okay, so we're getting pretty close now. Another bugbear of mine is the spacing between columns. So that in theory there should be a half column width space here, then a column of column width, then a space that is also a column width, then a column, then a space that's a column width. Okay, so we can simply do that. If we right click this and go to Format Data Series, we can change the gap to 100%. Press close, and there we have it. Okay, now one thing I will say, I think that's pretty good. There might be a few little minor amendments, or there might be a few amendments that we might be able to do. But basically, that looks pretty good. If we want to copy that, all we have to do now is after it's selected, is just do copy, and we can paste that in to a Word document or similar. The other thing is I would save this file with these changes, because if you decide you want to modify it slightly, you can't really amend it very well in the Word document, but you can amend it here and then re-copy and paste. So most of the hard work is done here. Okay, I think that should conclude our talk about how to graph and compare the means. What I think we'll do is I'll talk about histograms in another video shortly.